The Battle of Letter 2 BF, Ain Jalut in 1260, is often remembered as one of those rare moments in history where the trajectory of the world seemed to balance on a knife's edge. A decisive clash that not only shaped the fate of two mighty civilizations, but also altered the course of world history itself. It was the confrontation between the unstoppable tide of Mongol expansion, which had swept across Eurasia with unmatched ferocity, and the determined defense mounted by the newly established Mamluk Sultanate of Egypt, a state that many at the time saw as fragile, divided, and ill-prepared to face the greatest military machine of its era. Yet out of this unlikely confrontation came one of the most astonishing reversals in military history, a turning point that demonstrated the power of resilience, strategy, and leadership in the face of seemingly insurmountable odds. To understand the significance of this battle, one must first appreciate the extraordinary rise of the Mongol Empire under Genghis Khan and his successors. From the steppes of Central Asia, the Mongols had forged the largest contiguous empire the world has ever seen. Their armies were mobile, ruthless, and extraordinarily disciplined. They had already shattered ancient civilizations, conquering China, sweeping across Central Asia, devastating Persia, and crushing the once mighty Abbasid Caliphate when Baghdad fell in 1258. This was not just a conquest but a cataclysm, as Baghdad, long the jewel of Islamic civilization, was utterly destroyed. Its libraries, its palaces, and its cultural institutions were consumed in fire and blood. Hundreds of thousands perished, and the intellectual heart of the Islamic world seemed extinguished overnight. For many observers at the time, it appeared as though nothing could halt the Mongol storm. Entire kingdoms crumbled like sand before their horsemen. Their reputation was so terrifying that entire cities surrendered without a fight rather than face the slaughter that often followed resistance. It was against this backdrop of devastation that the stage was set for the events at Letter 2 BF Ain Jalut. After the fall of Baghdad, the Mongols pressed further westward under Hulagu Khan, one of Genghis Khan's grandsons. Hulagu was determined to complete the conquest of the Middle East, to extend Mongol domination all the way to Egypt, the last bastion of organized Muslim resistance. He had already sent forces into Syria, capturing Aleppo and Damascus with ease. The Crusader states, which still lingered in the Levant, offered little resistance and in some cases even sought pragmatic arrangements with the Mongols. It seemed inevitable that Egypt, too, would soon fall. Yet fate intervened, as Hulagu was compelled to withdraw the bulk of his army back east following the death of the great Khan Murk in 1259. This crisis of succession required his presence, leaving behind only a reduced Mongol force under the command of Kitbuka, one of his most loyal generals. Though smaller in size than Hulagu's full army, this contingent was still formidable and more than capable of intimidating the fragmented powers of the region. In Egypt, meanwhile, a new power had risen. The Mamluks were not traditional rulers but former slave soldiers, men who had once been bought and trained for war, often of Turkic or Circassian origin, who eventually seized power for themselves. Their regime was young and not yet fully secure. The ruler at this time was Sultan Qutuz, a man of remarkable courage and vision. He recognized that the Mongol advance was not just another external threat, but an existential danger that could wipe out not only Egypt, but the entire Islamic world. Despite internal divisions and rivalries within the Mamluk elite, Qutuz managed to rally his commanders and his people around the cause of resisting the Mongols. Perhaps most importantly, he had in his ranks the brilliant General Baybars, a man whose military genius would soon prove decisive. The Mamluks faced an unenviable choice. They could seek accommodation with the Mongols, as some states had done, accepting submission in exchange for survival. But Qutuz and his advisors understood that submission would not guarantee survival. The Mongols had a history of exacting brutal punishments even on those who surrendered, and Egypt, with its wealth and strategic position, would likely be stripped of its resources and subjected to foreign domination. Resistance was the only option, though it seemed suicidal. Yet it was in such desperate circumstances that the seeds of resilience and determination were sown. The confrontation came at letter 2 BF Ain Jalut, a site in the Jezreel Valley of modern-day Israel, in September 1260. The name letter 2 BF Ain Jalut means Spring of Goliath, a fittingly symbolic location given that this was a battle where a seemingly small and outmatched force faced a giant of history. The Mamluk army, numbering perhaps around 20,000 to 25,000 men, faced a Mongol force estimated at around 10,000 to 20,000. Though numbers were not overwhelmingly unequal, the Mongols' reputation, their tactics, and their aura of invincibility loomed large. The psychological battle was as significant as the physical one. The Mamluks prepared carefully. Baybars, in particular, devised a plan that would exploit Mongol overconfidence and make use of the terrain. The Mongols were masters of mobility, relying on their cavalry's speed and their ability to feign retreat to lure enemies into traps. This time, however, the tables would be turned. Baybars orchestrated a feigned retreat of his own, luring the Mongols into a pursuit through the valley where the Mamluk forces lay in ambush. The initial clash was fierce, with the Mongols charging with their usual ferocity. Arrows darkened the sky, and the thunder of hooves shook the ground. Yet as they pressed forward, the Mongols suddenly found themselves enveloped by hidden Mamluk reserves. The trap had been sprung. The battle that followed was intense and bloody. The Mamluks fought with extraordinary discipline and tenacity, matching the Mongols blow for blow. Sultan Qutuz himself is said to have thrown off his helmet at one point and charged into the fray, rallying his men with cries of "O Islam!" His personal courage inspired his troops at a critical moment when the outcome hung in the balance. The Mongol commander Kitbuka fought valiantly, but was ultimately captured and executed. Deprived of their leader and surrounded, the Mongol forces began to crumble. For the first time, the myth of Mongol invincibility was shattered in open battle. The significance of letter 2 BF Ain Jalut cannot be overstated. It was the first major defeat of the Mongol armies in direct combat, a moment that demonstrated they were not unstoppable. While the Mongols would continue to be a formidable force in other regions, their westward expansion into the heart of the Islamic world was effectively halted. Egypt and the Levant were preserved from Mongol domination. And the Mamluks emerged not only as defenders of their realm, but as saviors of the wider Islamic civilization. This victory gave them immense prestige and legitimacy, strengthening their rule and setting the stage for their domination of the region for centuries to come. The wider historical implications are profound. Had the Mongols triumphed at letter 2 BF Ain Jalut, they might have conquered Egypt and gained control of the vital crossroads of trade and culture between Asia, Africa, and Europe. The Mediterranean could have become a Mongol lake, and the balance of power in the medieval world would have shifted dramatically. The survival of independent Islamic states ensured that the intellectual, cultural, and religious traditions of the region endured. Cairo, under the Mamluks, would go on to become a vibrant center of Islamic learning, art, and architecture, in part because letter 2 BF Ain Jalut had preserved it from destruction. Moreover, the battle revealed important truths about warfare and resilience. The Mongols, though seemingly invincible, could be defeated through careful planning, unity, and inspired leadership. The Mamluks' use of strategy, deception, and terrain showed that intellect and adaptability could overcome raw power. It also underscored the importance of morale and faith. The Mamluks fought not only for survival but for the preservation of their faith, their culture, and their homeland, and that gave them a ferocity and determination that matched even the terrifying reputation of their enemies. The legacy of letter 2 BF Ain Jalut echoes through history. For the Islamic world, it became a symbol of resistance and triumph against overwhelming odds, a reminder that even in the darkest times, salvation was possible. For historians, It marks a crucial turning point in the Mongol expansion, the moment when their seemingly endless advance met a firm and final boundary in the Middle East. The Mongols would never again seriously threaten Egypt or North Africa, and their energies would be redirected elsewhere. The Mamluks, meanwhile, consolidated their power, eventually defeating the remnants of the Crusader states and ruling as guardians of the Islamic world until the rise of the Ottomans. In the grand tapestry of history, the Battle of Letter 2BF Ain Jalut stands as one of those defining episodes where the actions of a single day reverberated across centuries. It reminds us that history is not always determined by overwhelming force or by the seeming inevitability of empires. Sometimes, it is shaped by the courage of leaders, the unity of a people, and the brilliance of strategy at just the right moment. At Letter 2BF Ain Jalut, the tide of Mongol conquest met its match, and the world was forever changed. Mongol Empire's unstoppable rise. The Mongol Empire emerged from the vast steppes of Central Asia under the leadership of Genghis Khan in the early 13th century. What began as a loose confederation of nomadic tribes soon became the most formidable military force the world had ever seen. With extraordinary mobility, discipline, and ruthless tactics, the Mongols swept across Eurasia, conquering kingdoms and empires with terrifying speed. Their warriors, mounted on swift horses and armed with powerful composite bows, struck fear into cities and armies alike. They dismantled the Khwarezmian Empire, subdued much of China, and smashed through Russia and Persia. By the mid-13th century, their reputation for brutality preceded them, with tales of massacres and total annihilation spreading across continents. In 1258, their sack of Baghdad, the intellectual and cultural heart of the Islamic world, left hundreds of thousands dead and the Abbasid Caliphate in ruins, convincing many that the Mongols were unstoppable. Hulagu Khan's westward campaign. After Baghdad fell, Hulagu Khan, grandson of Genghis Khan, pressed westward with his mighty armies. His ambition was to extend Mongol rule over the entire Middle East, including Syria, Palestine, and eventually Egypt itself. The Mongols stormed into northern Mesopotamia, capturing Aleppo with devastating efficiency, and soon after Damascus surrendered without significant resistance. The once great cities of Islamic civilization seemed to collapse like dominoes before Hulagu's relentless advance. The Crusader states, weakened and fragmented by this time, watched uneasily from the coast and even entered into uneasy truces with the Mongols, fearing their wrath. For the people of the region, it seemed that the Mongol wave could not be stopped. With each conquest, Hulagu's armies came closer to Egypt, the last remaining independent power in the region, and whispers spread that soon the pyramids themselves would fall to Mongol horsemen, completing their dominance over the Islamic heartlands. Crisis after Mamluk Khan's death. Just as Hulagu Khan seemed poised to continue his march toward Egypt, an unexpected event shifted the balance of power. In 1259, the great Khan Mamluk, ruler of the entire Mongol Empire, died while on campaign in China. This triggered a succession crisis among the Mongol princes, who needed to return to the Mongol heartlands to secure their claims to leadership. Hulagu, as a senior member of the family, was compelled to withdraw much of his army back east, leaving behind a smaller but still formidable force in the Levant. Command of these remaining troops fell to Kitbuka, one of Hulagu's most trusted generals. Though fewer in number, Kitbuka's Mongols retained their terrifying reputation. The sudden reduction in Mongol forces gave Egypt and the surrounding lands a brief window of opportunity, though at the time many doubted whether even this weakened Mongol army could be defeated. The Mamluks of Egypt. While the Mongols were advancing, Egypt itself was ruled by a new dynasty unlike any other. The Mamluks were former slave soldiers, often of Turkic or Circassian origin, who had been bought as children, trained in military arts, and eventually rose to dominate the very kingdom they once served. In 1250, they seized power in Egypt, creating the Mamluk Sultanate. Their rule was still fragile in 1260, facing internal rivalries, political instability, and skepticism from outsiders. Yet they had two advantages: military professionalism and deep loyalty to Islam, which bound them together in the face of external threats. The ruler of Egypt at the time was Sultan Qutuz, a man of resolve who understood that the Mongols posed an existential danger not just to his throne, but to the entire Muslim world. Under his leadership, the Mamluks prepared for what many feared was an impossible struggle. Role of Baybars. Among the Mamluks, one figure stood out for his brilliance: Baybars, a commander of extraordinary skill and vision. Originally from the Kipchak steppe, Baybars had been sold into slavery, trained as a soldier, and risen through the ranks due to his exceptional abilities. He had already earned a reputation as a capable leader and tactician. Respected by his peers and feared by his enemies, Baybars recognized that defeating the Mongols required not only courage but clever use of strategy and terrain. He advocated for meeting the Mongols in battle rather than waiting for them to march into Egypt. His innovative thinking and experience in steppe-style warfare made him uniquely suited to countering Mongol tactics. Though sometimes in conflict with Sultan Qutuz politically, Baybars' military expertise was indispensable. In the campaign that culminated at Letter 2BF, Ain Jalut, his cunning strategies would prove to be the difference between survival and annihilation. Egypt's existential decision. The Mamluks faced a stark choice as the Mongols advanced. Submission to Mongol authority was one option, as some neighboring rulers had chosen, often sending tribute or envoys to pledge loyalty. But the Mongols had a reputation for ruthless cruelty even toward those who surrendered, and submission offered no real guarantee of survival. Egypt was wealthy, strategically vital, and symbolically significant, making it unlikely the Mongols would allow it autonomy. Sultan Qutuz understood that capitulation would only delay destruction. Fighting meant risking everything, but it also offered a chance to preserve Egypt and the Islamic world. Despite political divisions and personal rivalries, Qutuz managed to rally his generals and troops around the idea that resistance was not only necessary but sacred. The stakes were no less than the survival of their faith, culture, and homeland, and this gave the Mamluks a fierce resolve to fight. Choice of battlefield. Letter 2BF, Ain Jalut. The site of the coming clash was Letter 2BF, Ain Jalut, in the Jezreel Valley of modern-day Israel. The name means Spring of Goliath, a place steeped in symbolic resonance, recalling the biblical battle of David against Goliath. It was a fitting setting for a confrontation between a seemingly invincible empire and an outnumbered but determined force. The valley itself offered tactical opportunities. Its terrain was open enough for cavalry maneuvers, but also had natural features that could conceal ambushes. Baybars recognized its advantages and chose it as the ideal ground to counter Mongol mobility. By positioning Mamluk forces strategically and preparing hidden reserves, the Mamluks hoped to turn the Mongols' strength, speed, and aggression against them. The choice of battlefield was critical, for at Letter 2BF, Ain Jalut, the Mamluks would have their best chance to halt the Mongol advance and change the course of history. Mamluk strategy. The Mongols were famous for using feigned retreats to lure enemies into traps, but at Letter 2BF, Ain Jalut, Baybars planned to reverse this tactic. He arranged for a portion of the Mamluk forces to engage the Mongols and then simulate a retreat, drawing Kitbuka's forces into pursuit. The Mongols, confident in their superiority, would be baited into following, only to find themselves ambushed by concealed Mamluk reserves waiting in the valley. This required extraordinary discipline and coordination from the Mamluk army, as a false retreat could easily turn into a real rout if troops panicked. Yet the Mamluks executed the plan with precision. The use of deception, terrain, and timing was a masterstroke of strategy, showing that the Mamluks had studied their enemy closely. By adapting the Mongols' own methods against them, Baybars turned the battlefield into a trap that would ensnare the conquerors. The clash of armies. On the day of battle in September 1260, the air filled with the thunder of hooves and the whistling of arrows. The Mongols charged with their characteristic ferocity, their cavalry unleashing volleys that tested the Mamluk lines. Initially, the Mongols seemed to have the advantage, pressing forward with relentless speed. As planned, the Mamluks under Baybars staged a retreat, giving the impression of breaking ranks. Kitbuka, confident in victory and eager to crush his foes, ordered a pursuit. This decision played directly into Baybars' hands. The Mongols advanced deeper into the valley, where suddenly Mamluk reserves emerged from concealment. Surrounded on multiple sides, the Mongols found themselves in a position they had often forced upon others. What followed was brutal, close-quarters combat as swords, lances, and arrows clashed in deadly chaos. The disciplined Mamluk forces held firm, and momentum began to shift dramatically against the Mongols. Sultan Qutuz's personal bravery. As the battle raged, there came a moment when the outcome hung in the balance. The Mongols fought with their usual ferocity, and for a time it seemed as though the Mamluks might buckle under pressure. At this critical juncture, Sultan Qutuz displayed extraordinary personal courage. Casting aside his helmet so his troops could recognize him, he rode directly into the thick of the fighting, rallying his soldiers with cries of "O Islam!" His presence inspired the weary warriors, reminding them of the stakes they fought for, their faith, their families, and their very survival. Leaders who shared the risks of their men often galvanized morale, and Qutuz's fearless example reignited the determination of his army. His actions turned the tide at a decisive moment, ensuring the Mamluks did not falter and providing the courage needed to press their advantage against the faltering Mongol lines. Death of Kitbuka. The Mongol commander Kitbuka was a skilled and courageous leader, loyal to Hulagu Khan and determined to bring Egypt under Mongol control. During the fierce fighting at Letter 2BF Ain Jalut, he personally led his men with determination, refusing to retreat even as the battle began to turn against him. Ultimately, Kitbuka was captured by the Mamluks, and his death marked a critical turning point. Executed shortly after capture, his fall not only deprived the Mongols of their commander but also shattered their morale. The Mongol army, long accustomed to victory under resolute leaders, suddenly faced confusion and panic. Without Kitbuka's leadership, coordination broke down, and the disciplined Mamluks pressed their advantage relentlessly. The loss of Kitbuka symbolized the first true crack in the Mongol war machine and reinforced the significance of leadership in determining the outcome of great battles. First decisive Mongol defeat. The collapse of Kitbuka's army at Letter 2BF Ain Jalut was more than just a battlefield loss. It was a shattering of the aura of invincibility that had surrounded the Mongols for decades. Until that point, their conquests had seemed unstoppable, with even great cities and empires falling effortlessly before them. The news that the Mamluks had defeated a Mongol army in open battle spread quickly across the region, igniting hope among peoples who had lived in terror of Mongol advance. For the Mongols, it was a sobering reminder that their tactics were not infallible, and that determined, well-led opponents could match them. The psychological impact of this defeat was enormous. It demonstrated that the Mongols could be resisted, and that their empire, vast though it was, had limits. The myth of invincibility, so carefully cultivated through conquest and fear, was decisively broken at Letter 2BF Ain Jalut. Impact on Islamic world. The victory at Letter 2BF Ain Jalut preserved the independence of Egypt and the Levant, sparing them from the fate that had befallen Baghdad and so many other great cities. For the Islamic world, this was more than a military triumph. It was a civilizational reprieve. Cairo, which might have been destroyed like Baghdad, survived and thrived under the Mamluks. Over the following centuries, it became a vibrant center of Islamic scholarship, art, and architecture. The defeat of the Mongols also restored a sense of pride and confidence among Muslims, proving that the invaders could be resisted. Mosques, schools, and cultural institutions continued to flourish, preserving traditions that might otherwise have been extinguished. The psychological boost from this victory revitalized the Islamic world and allowed it to endure at a time when it faced near total destruction. The battle was nothing short of a civilizational turning point. Geopolitical consequences. The outcome of Letter 2BF Ain Jalut had profound geopolitical implications. Had the Mongols triumphed, they likely would have advanced into Egypt, seizing control of the crossroads of Africa, Asia, and Europe. This would have opened the way to North Africa and potentially threatened southern Europe from a new direction. Instead, their defeat confined Mongol expansion largely to Asia and parts of Eastern Europe, halting their westward momentum. For the Crusader states, caught between Mongols and Muslims, the battle also reshaped dynamics. Though some had briefly cooperated with the Mongols, the Mamluk victory ensured that Muslim power in the Levant remained dominant. In the long term, the Mamluks consolidated their control, eventually eliminating Crusader strongholds. Thus, Letter 2BF Ain Jalut preserved the balance of power in the region, preventing a Mongol-dominated Middle East and ensuring Egypt remained a powerful and independent center of Islamic civilization. Historical legacy. The Battle of Letter 2BF Ain Jalut has endured in memory as a turning point not only for the Islamic world but for global history. It showed that even the mightiest of empires could be stopped through unity, courage, and strategic brilliance. For the Mamluks, it secured their legitimacy as rulers and elevated them to defenders of the faith, a role they would proudly maintain for centuries. For the Mongols, it marked the first time their armies were decisively defeated in direct combat, demonstrating the limits of their expansion. Historians view it as a battle that preserved the Islamic world from total subjugation and safeguarded cultural, religious, and intellectual traditions that would otherwise have been lost. Like the biblical story of David and Goliath, Letter 2BF Ain Jalut became a timeless symbol of resistance against overwhelming odds, reminding humanity that history is often shaped by moments of unexpected defiance.